Hi everyone, this is Masashi and welcome to part 2 of Rodcast with Japanese history. How are you, Pastor Rod?
I'm great, and I love this subject of God and Japan. Wow, it's amazing, right?
It's an amazing history and I think everybody loved it and we love talking about it as well. But today I want to pick up maybe a couple hundred years later after that original move with opening of Japan to Christianity. Can you talk a little bit more about that, Pastor Rod?
Yeah, so Japan really closed up about the year 1600. There was laws, there was rules, and millions were tortured and persecuted, and we know at least 500,000 died for their faith in Christ. It was
Mm-hmm.
that early 1600s was so tough, and 250 years later, there was a change back to the emperor, the
Right.
Meiji Restoration. The emperor's name is Meiji, and so I think it was 1857. I think that's the date.
Mm.
Was the official legalization of Christianity in Japan after
Wow.
250 years. And it was because the American sent in a gunboat into Yokohama or
Yes.
down that way, down into
Yeah.
Kanagawa, anyway, somewhere there. There's black ships, they were called, with big cannons. And the American Navy said, "Open up Japan or we'll fire." And so
Right.
the new emperor who took back the power from the shoguns, that's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
history there, but anyway,
Yeah.
wanted to be Western oriented, opened up the country. And it was about 1857, all of a sudden, there was Christians coming out of the woodwork, coming out of the secret closet,
Mm.
coming out and declaring, actually, we are secret believers, or our ancestors are secret believers. And one of our pastors, Pastor Noboru, knows this history, so we could talk
Right.
to him one day about that. And people coming out, and in Nagasaki, one lady coming to the Catholic priest and saying,
Mm.
"Hello, I'm such and such. I believe like you." And the priest being
Oh,
shocked that people are coming out with this secret faith.
right.
And after 250 years of secrecy, a lot of that things got strange, but
Yep.
people's hearts were good. And so there was once again a move of Catholics in
Wow.
Nagasaki and in Fukuoka, where your lovely wife comes from. There was
Yes.
a renewal of interest. And right across Japan, there was some move. Now, the Protestant church in America then started sending missionaries. The first Protestant church in Japan was
Wow.
after 1857.
Uh,
But many daimyos were still persecuting Christians till the mid 60s. And there was a lot
Wow.
of stories of Christians coming out and being killed at that time. And there's a book I'm going to refer to later called Song for Nagasaki. And
Ooh,
in that
nice.
book, a wonderful man called Dr. Nagai talks about that
Right.
season, that there was actually people coming out, and then there was actually people being put in concentration camps and dying, even though
Wow.
the law had changed. But in the
Right.
60s, it really did get free. And
Mm.
missionaries came, and it was just amazing. There was Presbyterians and Methodists, especially from America, were coming in,
Right.
and little churches were started. But at the same time, after the end of the samurai,
Mm-hmm.
many of the samurai people didn't know what to do with their lives. And so they
Right.
were put into things like the new post office, the
Mm-hmm.
new government services. But there was this militaristic thing, which we're not going to talk too much about it, but just let you know,
Right.
it actually came out of that time where a lot of Japanese had lost positions. And
Mm-hmm.
so the country moved towards becoming westernized even in the
Yep.
military.
Wow.
And they actually waged a war against Russia, believe it or not. I think it was
Mm.
1895, and sunk all the Russian ships in a couple of days
Wow.
because the Japanese military had westernized.
Right.
Now, coming into the 19th century, there was slow growth, but steady growth until World War II. And of course, that was the most disruptive
Mm-hmm.
moment, 1939 to 1945. America
Right.
was involved 1941 till 45.
Mm-hmm.
And during that time, all the churches were put into one group, whatever they were. There was the
Mm-hmm.
Catholics and there was the
Yep.
rest. And the
Okay.
rest were put into one group called the Uniting Church, which we still have in
Yes.
Japan today. So Christians were persecuted again, but not to death. It was just very
Right.
hard to be a Christian during those years. But we want to come to this very important moment. I know that's where we want to get to.
Yes.
1945 and the
Mm-hmm.
end of World War II. because this is a cataclysmic change in Japan.
Right.
Someone described it to me this way, that the two nuclear bombs in Nagasaki, Hiroshima were huge and terrible,
Wow.
but they were not as big an impact as the emperor actually coming on the radio and surrendering to the Americans.
Right.
So let's go to that moment
Well,
where
that's
the
a
second.
pretty crazy moment, right, Pastor Rod? Because he basically came on the radio, say, "Hey, we have been defeated, and I am not God." Because a lot of people sought after him, and everybody thought the emperor was acting like a god. So that's a pretty big moment historically, would you say?
It's huge. I think it is the change to modern Japan. I think this
Hmm.
moment, because there was no TV back then, of course, and the
Hmm.
emperor had never had his voice on the radio. No one had ever heard him speak. And when he came on the radio, it was a little voice, and it
Right.
said, "We must endure the unendurable." Whatever that is in
Right.
Japanese,
Yeah.
that's the English version. We must endure the unendurable. We must
Hmm.
surrender. And I have given commands, everyone to lay down their arms. And that
Yeah.
day, everyone in Japan laid down their arms. It was a huge moment.
Yeah.
And when the Americans then came in under General Douglas MacArthur
Yeah.
into Tokyo Bay, or Yokohama Bay, actually, where you were, um, Douglas MacArthur became a friend of the emperor,
Wow.
an actual friend. And of course, they would have used interpreters, but there was an actual close friendship.
Wow.
There's a movie made about it called, I think it's called Emperor, starring Tommy Lee Jones.
Oh,
Yeah.
Tommy Lee, that's you.
People call me Tommy in Japan. Why? Hey, why?
Hey.
Hey, look at this face. Maybe not in his modern movies, but
Ooh.
anyway, Emperor. And in that movie, the Emperor of Japan says to MacArthur, "What? I've been called a god. What is a god?" Now, this is
Right.
really important.
Wow.
And MacArthur says, "A god is the one who created the world."
Wow.
And the Emperor of Japan said, "Well, I certainly did not do that. So I
Wow. So
guess I'm not a god."
do you think this actually happened, or do you
Yeah,
think
I
it's
do.
a movie made up?
I really do believe this happened. And
Wow.
MacArthur gave personal discussions with Billy Graham and the New York Times and others, like very out there
Wow.
media. I think that
Wow.
really did happen. And the emperor said, "Well, I guess that I definitely am not a god." And so when he said that to the Japanese people, those
Mm.
series of events, Japan changed.
Wow.
And Japan brought in a pacifist constitution, which means they're not going to have more wars,
Yeah.
um, that they're going to be Western leaning.
Hmm.
The Americans poured in what would be billions and billions and billions of dollars to help start the rebuilding of Japan, which was so
Hmm.
destroyed. Like every
Right.
city was leveled. Like Tokyo, which was made of wooden homes,
Yeah.
was just firebombed into the ground. It was
Yeah.
just Japan was destroyed.
Yes.
One of the interesting things I heard recently was Kyoto was not destroyed because of its
Really?
historic value.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I have heard that as well. They were kind
So
of
that's
picking
very,
choosing where to drop some bombs.
yeah. So you can go to Kyoto today. Why it's so famous is there's actually ancient pagodas and palaces and temples
Hmm.
that are actually very, very old and in their original state. That's
Right.
pretty interesting, right? Um,
Maybe
but
the emperor asked not to bomb that because it's the old capital, right? Tokyo was the
yeah,
new capital, so maybe it's considering the historical value, or maybe some of the things that was still there.
and I'm also believe the palace in Tokyo was also left alone. The whole
Hmm.
that 5 kilometers zone. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
So as a result, the emperor and Tommy Lee Jones and General Douglas MacArthur became very good friends. Now, the
Wow.
emperor was going to be hung, was going to be tried and hung as a war criminal,
Right.
but General Douglas MacArthur went to be his defender
Wow.
and said the emperor was not in control of all those actions. He was more of
Oh,
a passive person.
right.
And as such, now he is going to be the emperor. The Japanese love him.
Yeah.
and he is not the cause, and let him go. And the American legal system said, okay.
Wow. That would have been a crazy different history, wouldn't it, Pastor Rod, if he was actually
Yeah,
hung?
I think so. I
Oh,
think the beautiful Japanese hearts that we have today and their heart towards America, which is so positive,
yeah.
it could have been different.
Wow.
So I think it's an amazing moment of history that has linked Japan and even us being such close friends with Australia and Japan and
Mhm.
New Zealand, Canada, America, Britain. This connection
Yeah.
really formulated in those days.
Wow.
But there's
Isn't
one
there
more thing. Go on.
Yes,
Yeah.
go ahead. Wasn't there also a moment with MacArthur and the emperor talking about it, and also kind of emperor saying, "Hey, do you want us to be Christians? Because we've been defeated. What should we do as the next step?"
Yeah. And when I heard that, I thought it was a Christian myth. Like, that didn't
Okay.
happen. So you can actually Google it, MacArthur and Emperor Hirohito asking to be Christian. Google that, and
Wow.
the New York Times article will come up. Like, it's actually
Mm.
reported in 1945.
Wow.
But it also appears in Billy Graham's book, Talking to MacArthur,
Hmm.
verifying it. So when I did my own research, I found, okay, this is actually verified.
Wow.
So the emperor said to MacArthur, yeah, you are the conquering country, you are
Right.
Christian, and if you want me to, I'll become a Christian. And
Wow.
MacArthur's answer is shocking, not in a good way. It's a shock. He said, never.
Right.
That's the actual quoted word. Never.
Right.
I will never do that, but we will send 10,000 missionaries and 1,000,000 Bibles, or it might
Right.
be 10 million Bibles,
Yeah.
and your people will have a chance.
Okay.
So, one, that's a huge lost opportunity, because you might say, well, what if it said yes? What would have happened? And I don't know, but I do know this, that the Japanese people would have been educated in the
Yeah.
religion of Jesus
Hmm.
Christ,
Yeah.
whatever that means.
Yeah.
I think that would have happened, but it didn't happen.
Hmm.
So people today don't know about Jesus.
Yeah.
So that's a sad thing. But the good thing was MacArthur did actually put the call out to America
Hmm.
to send 10,000 missionaries and 10 million Bibles. And not 10,000 missionaries came, but at least one or two, let's say 2,000 missionaries came,
Wow.
and 10 million Bibles.
Yeah.
And that did happen. That actually did
Wow.
happen in the following years. So then we've got these 7 years with MacArthur still there.
Yeah. It's under America, right, for 7 years.
Yeah. And Okinawa was still under America till 1972. But the
Yeah.
rest of Japan in 1952, new constitution, new government, America
Mm.
left.
Right.
And Japan was truly under Japanese leadership in every area,
Right.
again,
Yeah.
every area, except Okinawa. But those 7 years were years of tremendous church growth.
Wow. It's just because of those missionaries coming in and the Bibles being sent? Was that
I
the only
think so,
reason, you think?
I think that in a post-war country where there's actually somehow good relationships, it's sort of it's hard to conceive, isn't it? So Japan lost so many people, and yet they really liked America because of
Mm.
these issues.
Right.
The people coming in were seen as friends.
Right.
Missionaries were seen as good people. The
Mm.
Bible was seen as something interesting.
Mm.
And during those 7 years, I've done research on this, Marsha, and I cannot find it in print. But people have told me they call it the 7 golden years of evangelism,
Oh, wow.
1945 to 1952, because Japan was so destroyed.
Right.
And what was brought in first of all was tents and food and water
Mhm.
and infrastructure and
Right.
leadership, training the Japanese in the new um,
Mm.
government style and
Yeah.
the schools, and what's being taught now is not sort of Shintoism in the old, but
Right.
now it's
Yeah.
the new Japan. For 7 years, there was church growth. There was
Wow.
many Japanese who opened their hearts to God, and um, it's an amazing story. But I think it's a story of a church emerging from the ash, the nation
Yeah.
emerging from the ashes.
Yeah.
It's sort of like Germany after the war,
Right.
or South
Isn't
Korea after the
also
Korean War
Yeah, I
in
was gonna mention that.
1953.
Very similar, right? After the war.
Very similar. So a lot of the big churches in Korea, in Seoul, started in that post
Mm,
1953 zone because of the huge amount of relief work was done by
wow.
Christians.
But that kind
So
of
that,
shows, Pastor Rod, the power of one generation, doesn't it? After the war, and just could be a nation shifting moment for Christianity.
yeah, absolutely. And it was. And so today in Japan, I'm going to flip. Today
Yeah.
in Japan, most churches have very elderly Christians.
Mm-hmm.
We love them, we honor them. There's nothing wrong. But under the age of 70, there's not many Christians
Right.
in Japan. So those people in that age bracket were the ones that came to Christ 1945 to 1952.
That's very true. Wow.
So it was real and it was lasting, and the
Mm-hmm.
churches grew, and the missions built universities. Some of them are our
Yeah.
famous ones.
Yeah.
I think Oyama Gakuin and many others.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, the one in Kyoto, the big
Mm-hmm.
one,
Yeah.
Christian University there. Churches were built, land was bought, churches were put on,
Yeah, land's a big
universities.
one, right, Pastor Rob? Because some of the amazing, beautiful churches in Tokyo, especially, are in the prime real estate location. But I've heard something alongside of the Americans kind of donated it to Christian churches because it was American based or American land. Was that true?
That's true, and I've verified that with a few key people. How did you get this land and church in this prime spot? The answer was that when the Americans left, they gave it. They gave it to
Yeah.
the Baptists or the
Yeah.
Presbyterians or whatever.
Mm.
What was a gift, which today is worth
Billions and
billions of dollars
billions.
in
Yeah.
some cases. Yeah, pretty amazing.
Well,
So the money was poured in, education was poured in. Many Japanese um, in education circles heard the gospel. And so this is
mhm.
interesting because a number of the very older pastors that I've met in Japan in my
Yeah.
23 years got saved in those years,
Wow.
especially around Osaka, Kyoto, that area.
Wow.
I've met older pastors and they got saved in those Christian universities.
Wow.
And they were very educated and very,
Mm.
very good people, loved the
Yeah.
word of God. And a lot of church growth came out of that moment.
Hmm.
Um, so we rejoice in all of that, and the people that are alive today, and many people who
Yeah.
have passed away are in heaven
Yeah.
from that era.
Yeah.
But then something changed.
Yeah, so because like you would think momentum will keep going after golden 7 years, and it will be in a different state. But what was the thing that actually didn't follow through or that didn't work after 7 years?
And that is the basis of my current studies, Marsh, because
Ooh,
there's not
nice.
much literature.
Right.
So if anyone here knows any literature of what happened in terms of the church stopped growing about 1952,
Mm-hmm.
53, what happened? Because it did happen. Because
Right.
there's a sort of a missing generation, say 50 to
Mm.
70-year-old in the church and even under that. So something stopped.
Right.
Evangelism stopped, church growth stopped. I don't know. But I do have some clues from some documents which I'm not going to go into right now, except to say I think Japan became an economic powerhouse
Right. Yeah,
in the
that's when
50s.
all these big companies start to rise and technology start to flourish as well. So maybe differences in lifestyle could be one of the reasons, Pastor Rod.
I think so much. I think Japan moved from being a post war destroyed country to being the first Asian tiger economy,
Mm-hmm.
which is what it was.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, we had Sony and Toyota and Honda and
Yeah.
Sanyo and these entrepreneurial companies. Back then in the 50s, made in Japan was not a great term, but by the
Mm.
70s became
Yeah.
world class champions. So the
Right.
phenomenal increase in Japan's GDP and lifestyle.
Yeah.
And so the question is, what happened? The only thing I could say is the working man was working very hard for corporations
That's true.
and working very long hours, and their wives were often working, or
Mhm.
the it had changed.
Yeah.
Japan had changed, and maybe, just maybe, there wasn't a message for the common man.
Right.
And I will write about this in the future and put some resources behind it. But that's my summary, is
Yeah.
that the great church after the war, which was so powerful,
Mm-hmm.
didn't morph into a message and something for the very, very hard-working corporate life
Right.
in Japan. I've got nothing more than that. There's no literature on what went
Maybe
wrong.
maybe they needed a big three, Pastor Rod, with the simpleness of just reading the Bible. Because I would imagine the men to be working all day, probably over the weekend as well, and not having enough time to go to church and not enough time to read the Bible or pray. So maybe that guilt side comes in of like, I can't do this because I've got to make money, and maybe the economy and the nation becomes their God, replacing Jesus. What do you think?
I think you as a Japanese person has probably stated that better than I could, because I don't want to judge anyone, but I think you're right. There are causes.
Yeah.
One of the questions I'd like to answer is, so they brought 10 million Bibles into Japan in
Hmm.
1945, which is such a gift. We thank the Bible League and
Yeah.
a number of very generous. If your
Hmm.
family gave money to the Bibles at that time, thank you so much, because there was a generation
Mm.
move
Yeah.
of God. But I wonder what language it was, what
Not sure.
translation it was,
Hmm.
because Japanese was changing dramatically, the
Yeah.
language.
Yeah. Totally.
You can imagine a country going into the war, coming out of the war, changes to
Hmm.
everything, new generation, and then becoming a powerhouse.
Yeah.
Language changes. And I've studied linguistics, as you know, and one of the things about linguistics is the more a language is living, the more a language changes. So
Yeah.
Japanese is a living language. It's a
Yeah.
changing language. Um, so I just wonder whether it was understandable to the
Mm.
new generation. Now, they would have been able to read the words on the page, although not all of them.
Hmm.
But it's like me when I got saved, Marsha. This is
Yeah.
sort of a passion area for me. When I got saved at 19 was 1979. Wow.
Ooh,
I'm now
wow.
64. Yeah. So if people had given, as a seeker, as a non-Christian, I was a fireman and I was seeking God,
Yeah.
and my two friends gave me a new translation of the Bible. The NIV came out in
Oh,
1979. I got saved
NIV.
in
Wow.
1979. If they had given me a King James version, and I love the King James, I love the New
Yeah.
King James. So this is not a value judgment, it's a language
Hmm.
issue.
Hmm.
If they'd given me a King James Bible, I would not have read it. I
Right.
just would not have read it. It was Old English,
Yeah.
and I just could not have got into it.
Hmm.
New King James, yeah, but that wasn't out then.
Right. Right.
Um, but they gave me the NIV, and it was readable. And it
Wow.
was a huge part of why I read the whole New Testament and read about Jesus and finally got saved.
Right.
So the issue of language,
It's a big
as you
thing.
know, if we do one on our story in the last 20 years
Yeah.
in Lifehouse, and we've seen thousands of Japanese give their lives to Jesus
Right.
in our generation. But back then, I wonder whether language was an issue,
Yeah.
because we find it an issue today.
Yeah. Totally. And how
And
do we go, Pastor? So switching a question as well, like it was 7 golden years of evangelism to now. Some of the times, like we hear a lot of people say Japan is a missionary's graveyard, or in Japan is unresponsive, or Japanese people are not open, and it's a closed-hearted nation. Like, how do we get to that place?
um, in this question, I've got to be careful, because I've met many missionaries who did serve in Japan.
Yeah.
And the first thing I want to say is thank you
Yeah.
for praying and serving and giving and loving and sowing seeds. Thank you so
Hmm.
much to the generation. I believe their zeal was amazing.
Yeah.
I believe their hearts are amazing. Their sending churches were amazing. Great, great people that I meet. But they say to me, um, thank you, Rod, for coming and
Hmm.
coaching a new generation.
Yeah.
I wish we knew what you knew. And I've even got that recently in these studies I'm doing
Wow.
with an elderly missionary,
Wow.
a very senior missionary, saying there was some keys there we need to understand.
Right.
And I just think in any culture, there are cultural keys
Yeah.
to breaking open the culture in
Hmm.
that time, in that generation.
Yeah.
So the 7 golden years, yeah, the cultural key was there.
Mm.
After, there wasn't much evangelism. There wasn't much people becoming believers. Why? That's the question. But
Right.
we have found some cultural keys. So getting back to your question, I don't think Japan is a graveyard of missionaries, and I don't think Japanese hearts are hard. I just think Japan is unique.
Yeah.
You're unique, Mash.
Thank you. Thank you.
Your people are unique, all in a good way. We love them so much, but
Yeah.
we had to understand what the problem was.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the problem was about language.
Yeah.
And I don't know if we want to go into another podcast on this, because I think it's really important that we talk
Yeah.
about this as a breakthrough in a culture where people said the people are hard,
Yeah.
but we don't find them hard.
No.
So what went wrong? That's really important. Now, a lot of Japanese pastors have also said to me, Pastor Rod, what's wrong with us? Or why did God do this? And so I'm saying, no.
Right.
That's no.
Yeah.
That's not the issue. There's another issue, and the issue is strategy,
Strategies and
culture,
keys. Yeah.
contextualization, language. It's a different basket.
Yeah.
And I believe it's the same with many cultures in the world where people are so-called resistant, because we also lived in Thailand. It has the same title of the graveyard of missionaries, but we found God moving there.
Yeah.
And then there's people groups that are different faiths.
Yeah.
And we're working with some of those, and some of my friends are working with some of those and are finding great fruitfulness.
Yes.
And I can't even talk about some of them because they're actually closed countries, but I know a lot of it's about language, contextualization, and the way you approach people with the good news of Jesus Christ.
Right.
So once again, people are served in Japan. Thank you so much.
Yes.
So grateful, so thankful. You laid a carpet of prayer
Yeah.
and sowing seeds.
Yeah.
But I do believe there are cultural keys that can open people. And even, looking at, America, Australia, we've got to find the cultural key for this generation.
Yeah.
And it is different. So this is not like a Japan thing.
No, it's a worldwide thing, isn't it? But do
Yeah,
you think
and I
there's
think
like another wave coming past the world? It feels like, God is really moving all around the world, and especially in Japan as well. So maybe like, with Francis Xavier, there's a big call for people to come and bring more missionaries. And after war, especially, hey, bring more Bible, bring more missionary. Do you think that's kind of like another Macedonian call now to say, hey, world, Japan is open. Where's everybody? Hey, come and help us. Let's come and reach Japanese people here. Do you think there's another call?
yeah, and I think you're the man to do it. Everything from a Japanese heart, call to the world, much call out.
Yeah.
And Jesus said this in Luke 10:2. He said, look at the fields, they're ripe to harvest. Ask the Lord of the harvest to send laborers into the fields. I believe that's where we're at. We're calling, especially to the American church, because there's actually responses happening in America towards Japan and other countries. Right now, I believe there's another missions movement happening in America.
Wow.
And I think as you and other Japanese call out, come on over. Come on over. Help us. Time is now. As people come with more Bibles, and we've just done a new translation of the Japanese Bible
Yeah.
with Bible League. Thank you so much, Bible
Thank
League.
you.
We love
Yes.
you. The whole Bible's coming out by the end of 2024. We've got the New Testament right now on YouVersion.
Yeah.
It's called the Japan ERV, if you want to look it up. New call. There's going to be something happening. And you and I have been in conversations, Marsh, with many missions people, right, in America.
Yep.
What do you feel? Do you feel there's something happening?
Oh, I think Japan's always been open, but there's new openness, I guess, to Jesus, and also I don't know. It's always funny how open Japanese people are to the Western culture. So I think that might be the new key here. Just not just, of course, Japanese reaching Japanese, but also with a help with Western friends or any friends, I guess, outside of
Yeah.
Japan. It's a tag team collaboration, Pastor. I think is the key.
So what would you say? I'm going to finish in a minute, I guess. But what would you, if you called out right now for people, what would you say? What's your call?
I would say, hey, maybe what Francis is it Francis Xavier that said it, but give up your small
Yeah.
ambition and come change the world.
Yes. Say it again.
Give up your small ambitions and come and change the world.
Whoa, gold. Gold.
But I think it's just so open. Japanese people waiting to hear, and I think if they had a chance to hear, I think I literally think the people with right relationship will believe and have faith in Jesus. So that's what I would say, Pastor Rod. Just come over and see and taste and see what God is doing in Japan.
Awesome. Well, it's great. It's been a privilege to be with you for at least 10 years now, 12 years we've been
12,
together.
yeah.
It's been a great joy. And now to see so many of your countrymen and women
Hmm.
growing in Christ, new churches planted, Lifehouse churches, but other churches, and
Yes.
that there is definitely something happening.
Yeah, amazing. So if you're interested, everybody, if you're listening from overseas, send us a message or something to kind of collaborate how you can be part of a move of God in Japan. But thank you so much, Pastor Rod. I think this historical lesson is amazing. So maybe we need to continue to do it in one way or another. But thank you, everybody, for listening to the Rodcast. Wait for another great episode of Rodcast releasing soon. So see you guys. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today. And if you enjoyed today's episode, why don't you subscribe on whatever platform you are listening to this, and we'll see you next time.